going to tell you, basically, my plan is kind of in 4 parts. I want to talk a little bit about the college and national landscapes for students with autism. Sorry, I want to do just a little bit about increasing familiarity with autism, though I suspect that people in the audience are fairly familiar with it. I want to tell you a little bit about what colleges are doing to support autistic students currently, and then have that kind of morph into some of the emerging support efforts related to the employment and workforce transition areas that our college folks are interested in pursuing. What I'd like you to know about the College Autism Network, the organization that I work for, is we're a nonprofit that was founded in 2016. We really take the word network seriously. We connect various stakeholders, so campus professionals and researchers, employers, and self-advocates. And we support institutions of higher education that are working hard to improve their access and outcomes for autistic students. So let me start with this first. Let me start at the beginning. It's a good plan. Understanding the college and national landscapes for students with autism. One of the most important things going on right now in the field of autism in higher education is the conversation around what autism is or isn't. And so this is a major topic in presentations and conferences related to autism. I'll try and make that differentiation between autism more specifically and neurodiversity writ larger in a moment. But at the heart of this conversation is this paradox. What is autism? Is it a disease to be cured, something that has to be fixed in a person, or is autism just a label that describes naturally occurring variations in the brain? From where we sit, we're really focused on that second option. And language, of course, matters tremendously in this conversation. So when I'm talking about neurodiversity, of course, this refers to a group or a community, an organization that supports neurodiversity, a community that encourages and recognizes neurodiversity. Neurodivergent refers to a person, and it's a different experience than being neurotypical. And autism, which is really our focus, is one type of neurodivergence, sometimes still called Asperger's, though that has technically been removed from the diagnostic lexicon. And autism spectrum disorder is the technically appropriate term this year. This is an ever-changing challenge in this field. Every time a new diagnostic and statistical manual comes out from the American Psychiatric Association, there's new language. But I always like to include Asperger's when I speak because there are a lot of people who came of age and really embraced their autistic identity at a time when Asperger's was used as a sort of a shorthand for high-functioning autism. And so they very proudly refer to themselves as Aspies or Asperger's individuals. So this question always comes up on college campuses. Are there more autistic and neurodivergent students on campus? Because everybody will say in an audience, I sure feel that way. It sure seems that way. And the answer is absolutely. There are more students who identify as autistic or identify as neurodivergent on college campuses. It does not mean that there are more people with autism, but more of them are finding their way to college. And there are reasons for that, right? More people are diagnosed formally with autism, and that's the result of clearer criteria and improved testing and more experienced and capable diagnosticians doing that testing. But also a big reason is that services that are available to children and individuals who have a diagnosis of autism are significantly better than services that exist for students with other types of learning disabilities. So there's actually a financial incentive for people to be diagnosed with autism or to have their children diagnosed with autism. And so that leads to more children in the K-12 world with that diagnosis. And we're seeing steady improvement in the experiences of those children and young adults, in part because there's more funded research on infants and children with autism and really fascinating neuroscience breakthroughs that show some of the distinct brain and cognitive differences that people with autism have in terms of looking at their actual brains. Their functional MRIs are used sometimes to look at the brains of people who are diagnosed with autism. And what it shows is that autistic brains kind of light up differently when asked to perform certain tasks. So it really is a brain wiring function. We see that We see then pre-kindergarten and K-12 services responding to this increase in diagnoses. And they respond to and are governed by federal legislation known as the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that tells families this is what you can expect from your school system. And one of the things that you can expect is any child with any disability receives an IEP, an individualized educational plan. And that plan, of course, is created by a group of people, a team of people that sit around and figure out what will it take to help this child be successful in this setting.
Haley,
and yeah.
Somebody did ask if you could repeat the part you said about financial incentive for diagnosis.
Right. So in terms of the kinds of support that a school system will provide for a student with a learning disability, having a diagnosis of autism opens up a level of support and funding that might not be there for a child who does not have that diagnosis, but is perhaps demonstrating some of the characteristics or some of the learning challenges that are common to autism. So if a family can get a child tested and that testing results in a diagnosis, it opens a door in a lot of school systems to a level of support and service that wouldn't otherwise be there. So I'm happy to talk more about that if there's more clarification needed. But these students get all of these supports and services, and then they come to college. And this is what we call the service cliff. And in this case today, the first service cliff. And a lot of this is the result of the differences between the IDEA, which governs the K-12 world, and the ADA, which is what colleges and universities answer to. These are two very different sets of legislation philosophically. The IDEA is really focused on success. What do we have to do to help a child be successful in this setting? And colleges and K-12 systems go to great lengths to provide services and support for children with disabilities. The ADA is not focused on success. Success is great, but the focus is access. And so colleges have to provide, are told by federal legislation that they have to remove institutional barriers to access and provide the opportunity, provide the access for a person with a disability to have the educational experience that others have. But success is really up to them. In the first IDEA, the parents are really driving the car. The ADA expects that the students themselves will drive the car. So colleges get to make decisions about what they believe to be appropriate supports. So, and think about this. A student graduates from high school in June at the age of 18 and starts in college in August of that same year, if they go straight through. So in those 2 months, the bottom sort of falls out for a lot of families, and they get to college, and the student gets to college, and the landscape is so different. And I spent a number of years as a dean of students at a couple of different institutions, and I can tell you that right around October, we'll start to see students really struggling because they are used to a level of support with the IDEA that they are not getting anymore in college. And it's frustrating for parents because colleges sell themselves in a way that parents hear as right, like we're a small personalized place. Your student will be known. The faculty will know your student's name. We do whatever we have to help your student be successful. Like the admissions folks are saying all of those things to get a student to enroll. And the parents hear that through the lens of the IDEA, but the college personnel are actually saying that through a very different lens. And this is where services feel like they've kind of plummeted. I'm not going to say a lot more about that, but it's more kind of some background that I think might be useful. And I want to shift a bit to the increasing familiarity with autism. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because, like I said, I think that this is an audience that's probably pretty familiar with this. But again, knowing that I'm focusing primarily on autism, I want to more about that. But it's more kind of some background that I think might be useful. And I want to shift a bit to the increasing familiarity with autism. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because, like I said, I think that this is an audience that's probably pretty familiar with this. But again, knowing that I'm focusing primarily on autism. I want to just make sure that I'm painting an accurate picture of the kinds of experiences that many of our students have in college. So autism, or autism spectrum disorder, which is the official DSM term, refers to a developmental disorder, most commonly characterized by certain traits. There's a lot of argument about developmental disorder as a phrase, as you might imagine, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But the traits that affect social interactions, language, behavior. It's a set of adaptive responses to the way the brain sees the world. And this is so crucial for the non-autistic world to understand. All day, every day, our brains are taking in so much information and making rapid calculations at lightning speed and then telling us how to behave. That's what I mean by an adaptive response. You take in information from the environment, you process it, and you act. And it happens like that, right? So, and it's something like if you walk into a room and it's chilly, you might pull your sweater up over you, keep your coat on. If you walk into a room and it's very warm, you might take your sweater off. Those are adaptive responses to the environment. And sometimes two people walk into the same room and do two very different things in response to the temperature because our brains are very different. But when I say adaptive responses, that's really what it is. It's taking in information through our various senses, quick processing that goes on, millions of little bits of our brain are working, and then this is how we act. And what's really critical to understand, of course, is that our brain wiring is what determines our response to the environment. And our brain wiring is not a moral choice. If you are left-handed in this audience, you didn't choose that, right? It's a function of how your brain is wired. And no one would blame you for being left-handed. They might make your life a little more difficult for assuming that everybody's right-handed. But the ways that our brains are wired is not a choice. Your blue eyes are not a choice you made. So the common characteristics of autism are not moral failings, though they often are seen that way. Things like meltdowns or socially awkward interactions, repetitive activities. But it's just a brain responding to the environment. So this inevitably brings us to the question of, is autism a disability? And the truth is that there are many, many people who meet one or more of the criteria for autism spectrum disorder, and they live and they learn and they work without formal accommodations of any kind. Autism characteristics are a problem when they impede a person from achieving their goals, or they disrupt others in a way that impedes their pursuit of their goals. And that's when it moves into the realm of disability. By itself, it's not a disability when it impedes us from getting something we need, like an education or a job. Then it becomes a disability, and it's that interaction of person and environment that makes it so. What do we know about autism? It's, as I said, brain-based and hardwired, and we see those differences in the brain. We know that autism may be evident as early as a few months old in the way that infants interact with their environment. We know there's a genetic predisposition. Autistic people more often have autistic children, but not all. And not all autistic children have autistic parents. So it doesn't explain all cases. And going back to that earlier question, it can't be cured in the conventional sense, right? We don't have the capacity to rewire somebody's brain at that level. But we do know that early intervention for children makes a difference in their later experience. And this is not an effort to so much fix them as it is to help them adapt to an environment that is not designed for them. So common characteristics and how they show up. I don't think any of this will be new to you, but this is what I usually talk about on college campuses as we're trying to help faculty and staff better understand their students. One of the most common, of course, autistic people sometimes have difficulty reading body language or facial expressions. They don't necessarily read the room well, and that can lead to awkward social interactions. That might lead to isolation, sometimes leads to misunderstanding with peers or authorities, and sometimes classroom or workplace disruption, talking out of turn or asking a lot of questions. So much of our behavior, if we're neurotypical, is informed by the information that we're taking from our environment, and then we mirror it. So if you walk into a room in a library and everybody's quietly studying, you would probably lower your voice and maybe be silent. If you walked into that same room and loudly greeted everybody, people would be annoyed. right? Because obviously this is not that kind of room. People with autism can have difficulty with any change in routine, and that's when we see heightened anxiety and anger and acting out and a fear of trying something new. If you're not confident in your ability to make changes on the fly, to read the room, to figure out what's going on and adjust, it tends to make you pretty anxious to be in that sort of situation. And of course, literal and concrete thinking. It's hard to recognize sarcasm, and this can lead to misunderstanding with peers. And we see college students who are often vulnerable to bullying and deceit, being teased by their peers. You know, the holidays just got over, and maybe like some of you, I watched the movie Elf a number of times, which I just love. And there's that scene where Buddy the elf is interacting with Miles, who's a character, who's a small person played by Peter Dinklage, and Buddy calls him an elf, and that infuriates this person because he thinks he's being made fun of. And Buddy's like, "No, it's so good to meet you. You know, I love elves." And Miles grabs him into a headlock, right, and is screaming at him, "Call me elf one more time. Just call me elf one more time." And Buddy says, "You're an angry elf," right? He obliges because he doesn't realize that Miles is being sarcastic. I like to work an elf reference in there when possible. Difficulty with abstract concepts. This is why we often see students struggling in upper division classes. They've learned what they need to learn in terms of memory and dates and that information, but the abstract concepts of upper division classes are sometimes pretty challenging. And then, of course, sensory sensitivity, very commonly a challenge for autistic people. And here, I mean, I'm not talking about like annoying sounds. None of us like annoying sounds, but physically painful reactions to certain sounds, to certain types of light, to certain smells that can sometimes lead to things like hygiene issues. If taking a shower physically hurt you, you might be less inclined to take a shower. Conflicts over noise. This is really common in residence halls and can lead to a lot of battles with RAs about what's allowable noise. If any kind of loud noise really bothers you and you're living in a residence hall, you're going to have some challenges and you're going to make unreasonable requests. And unreasonable is in quotations for a reason there, right? Because they're not unreasonable to the person whose brain is wired in a way that makes a buzzing light physically painful. And so, you know, the result of all of this for college students is the environment supports some brain wiring, neurotypical brain wiring, more than others. And it leaves some people feeling chronically different, doubt, misunderstood, stressed. And that has a pretty profound psychic impact on these students. We see comorbidity rates of depression and anxiety that are very high due to environmental rigidity and the difficulty processing social information that are typical characteristics of autism, but also the impact of peer rejection. If you can imagine yourself being that red peg, and all day, every day, you're being pounded to fit into a round hole and you're a square peg. Those shards of yourself are what's left. And so it's a pretty painful way to exist, especially on a college campus where there's so much emphasis put on social interaction. So what are colleges doing to support autistic students? Recognizing that more of them are coming to campus and colleges have a commitment or a desire to improve their retention rates. And what we see are that students with autism and related types of neurodivergence leave school at a much higher rate than their peers who are academically just similarly capable. So you have a neurotypical student and a neurodivergent student, both of them academically qualified, strong students. That neurotypical student is going to be more likely to persist and graduate. And this is what leads us, of course, to having a lot of unemployed neurodivergent people because they don't get their college degrees. So colleges have responded to this in several different ways. And I'll talk about three general approaches. Some schools have developed what we call autism-specific programs or autism support programs. And these are often fee-based. Students enroll or are accepted into these programs in addition to being accepted into the college or university. And they may pay a fee. That fee may range from $1,000 a semester to some of them are like $8,000 or $10,000 additional on top of tuition, room and board. There's about 140, 150 of these programs that are out there. And I think of this as sort of the gold standard. If you've got an autistic student and you want to give them the best chance of being successful, finding a school that has one of these programs is a good place to start. And these programs are growing pretty rapidly. Every year at our annual conference, we do a pre-conference workshop for those who are looking to start a new program, and every year it sells out. And the fee structure is complicated, right? Because it disadvantages some families that don't have the kind of resources that they need, because these fees are not necessarily, are probably not paid by financial aid. They're going to come out of pocket, or in some states, they may be supported by vocational rehabilitation services. But the kinds of support they provide, the peer mentoring, it's academic and social support, and some career planning. It's really wraparound, and it's, what do we have to do to help the student be successful? So it's kind of going back to that model of success versus access. Another approach is that a disability services office, which every campus has or should have, will have a person or maybe a few people who are very knowledgeable about neurodiversity and autism, and they become a good ambassador and navigator for that student. And that office will provide academic accommodations. And if students need more support, that office may refer them to some outside services. And then there are schools that really do nothing and they don't get a medal. They just do the actual bare minimum that is required by law around accommodations, but they don't have a depth of understanding of neurodiversity to really impact the entire community. Let me digress for one slide here and talk about a different kind of program, something called the Inclusive Post-Secondary Education Program. These are campus-based support programs for people with intellectual disabilities. Some of these participants may also have a diagnosis of autism. They may not. These students, these participants, so not really students, they are not enrolled in degree granting programs. They're not matriculating students. Right. So they're not pursuing a degree, a major in sociology and a BA in psychology. They are there to work on life and employment skills. And the college or university has managed to create a program, and they may be residential, they may live in a residence hall. They are not matriculating students, but they may be on campus, they may be attending some classes, and they don't earn a diploma, they earn a certificate or a credential. And these are often called, you might hear them referred to as IPSI or TIPSID programs, and there's about 300 nationwide. And so the funding for these programs is state or federal, whereas those autism programs I mentioned earlier are going to be funded from a family's pocket. These might be funded through some of the services that support people with intellectual developmental disabilities. It's getting increasingly crowded on campuses because both types of programs are growing in number. And it's really confusing to people, especially to families, to try and distinguish, disambiguate these two types of programs. So when we look at best campus practices on campus, there won't be any surprise here. Faculty and staff training and awareness is really where you've got to start. So this is one of the things that we do through the College Autism Network, is we have a group of speakers, consultants who go to campuses and really start to have these conversations with faculty and staff about neurodivergence and autism. Always a lot of interest because faculty especially are seeing challenges in their classroom, and they're trying to figure out how to manage those. And most people have this awareness, right, of, as I started in an early slide, are there more students coming to campus with autism? Yes, I'm seeing that in my classroom. And so academic accommodations are very supportive of students whose brains are wired differently. So extended time on assignments is a typical accommodation. Distraction-free environment for testing can be really helpful. Chunking assignments into sections or tasks. If a student is not good at the abstract concepts, then saying to a student, choose a research topic that reflects your interests is like, that's a nightmare. Autistic students need clear instructions, and they need structure for the assignment. So assigning a paper at the beginning of the semester that's due at the end of the semester and not giving them chunks to work on is probably going to lead to academic disaster. And then clear language. If people who are autistic struggle with things like sarcasm or mixed messages, and we use those things, then we might as well be speaking a foreign language to them. And also on campus, sensory issues need to be taken seriously. And I think this is something that we've seen some real growth in. And I think this is partly because of the effect, the positive effect of the ADA. Colleges are no longer as quick to dismiss complaints from people with disabilities, whether it's curb cuts and elevators that work reliably, or buzzing lights, or dining hall food that is overly spicy. Most of these changes or adaptations are not that hard to make, but it starts with taking them seriously. This is not a moral failing. This is how my brain is wired. And this is where I'll kind of shift into some of your world, because what we see for our program directors, and we've got the College Autism Network has about 300 campus professionals who are members. And I meet with those program directors pretty frequently. We do a lot of outreach and education. And there's a significant challenge that they are facing related to employment. And it's a pretty simple equation, really. These folks have their hands full keeping autistic and neurodivergent students academically successful. It is not an easy thing to grab students as they fall off that service cliff and try and keep them afloat. So the idea of helping them, so their focus is really, like we always talk about sort of the three phases of our work is moving in, moving through, moving on. And moving in is really about helping families make good transition choices as they are looking at colleges. And what's the best college for my son or daughter? Moving through is really about the program itself. Like, how do we keep students academically eligible? How do we keep them enrolled? How do we keep them socially successful? Moving on, that's the employment piece. And our program directors, it's a lot of work to focus on the moving through part. And so they want to be able to refer their students down the hall to the campus, to the career services professionals. But the other part of this equation is that the career services professionals are not very familiar with autism or neurodiversity. And so suddenly they are faced with a caseload or somebody on their caseload who doesn't conform to the ways that students are expected to behave. So they're not very good at interviews and they're overwhelmed by job fairs. And so what then happens is that autistic students are often left out of some of the key campus career services that are offered. And this is really frustrating to families who feel like they have paid good money to have a student be supported in college. And now my son has graduated and he's at home and he's living here and he can't get a job. And why did you not carry him over the goal line? Right. So, employment becomes the goal line and we're stuck in the red zone. And that's why I call this the second service cliff, because that's sort of what it feels like. We dropped off the cliff again. So now I'm on the fourth and final section of my talk here, which is to talk about some of the support efforts that are related to employment or workforce transition. And I suspect some of this will be very familiar to you. For instance, I think you're probably here because you believe in the value of hiring neurodivergent employees. You know that they are innovative thinkers and creative problem solvers. They approach challenges in completely unthinkable ways to the neurotypical world and can really make a tremendous contribution. They often bring to their work a level of hyper-focus that's really valuable. They're sometimes exceptionally good at pattern recognition. This is why we see a lot of financial and technology firms seeking neurodivergent talent, because they recognize that, these are tendencies that can really benefit us. And they're also really loyal employees. Autistic people know that the world is not designed for them. And if they can find a work environment that feels like it was designed with them in mind, they're going to work really hard and stick with you. They don't want to go back out into a world that is that round hole and get pounded on some more. So this got me thinking about what are some of the best practices in the workplace? Because we talk about this a lot within the College Autism Network. And I just took this campus slide and made some changes, right? It starts with colleague and supervisor training and awareness, really helping people understand some of the types of things that I've just covered. And workplace accommodations actually look a lot like academic accommodations: extended time on assignments in a distraction-free environment to do your work, chunking assignments into sections or tasks, and using clear language to request work that needs to be done. And sensory issues are taken seriously. I just want to come back to that clear language piece because this is so important, I think, in the college and the work setting. We are so trained to be nice people, most of us. And we have that whole feedback sandwich, right? You say something nice and then you give them the critical feedback and then you say something nice again. And that's how we are expected to provide feedback, right? Hey, we really value having you here and you bring so much to our organization, but your work is not the kind of quality that we need. And I need you to make some changes, but we're so excited to have you here. Okay. That's a nightmare for an autistic person who's trying to figure out what the heck are you trying to say to me? I think they're happy with me. I'm not really sure. And so we need to reduce our use of sugarcoating. You can be kind, you can be respectful, but you need to be clear. Recruiting and hiring practices. I suspect that many of you are already using some of these, seeking out autistic and neurodivergent candidates to make it part of your diversity efforts. There are a lot of employers who are just figuring this out. Like neurodiversity is diversity. That would not be you all. Finding ways to include current autistic and neurodivergent employees in the interviewing process so that the first time a new autistic employee meets another autistic employee isn't a couple of weeks into the job. They actually meet them on the front end. Rethinking your interviewing strategies. We have such a bias toward people who can make small talk and make eye contact. If those are important to you, you're going to miss out on some amazing talent. And setting your autistic and neurodivergent candidates up for success. Make sure that supervisors always have the kind of training and support they need. And when a supervisor leaves and a new supervisor comes in, if they're supervising neurodivergent employees, they need the same training. Shorten meetings. It's really just advice for anybody at any time. Shorter meetings are better for everyone. But extend the runway for learning the job. When you're functioning with a level of anxiety that comes from not being able to read the room well, that anxiety gets in the way of learning. And so if you have like a 2-month runway for somebody to get up to speed in a job, for a neurodivergent or autistic person, it might be 4 months because the brain can only take in so much, especially when it's an anxious brain. And trust me when I say most autistic brains are anxious brains because of that whole environmental issue. And always ask for feedback about what's working, what's not working, and follow up on the feedback that you hear. Don't assume that just because they seem to be doing okay, that they don't have any concerns or complaints. I want to talk about a couple of specific things that might be useful to you if you don't already know about them. We're seeing a growth in the neuro-inclusive hiring platform world. Mentra.me is a really great platform. It's just probably been the last 2 years that they've really gotten going. But Mentra helps neurodivergent candidates create a profile for themselves that really highlights and makes clear what they would bring to a job. And then using AI, they match those candidates with employers who are looking for particular talents. And it takes some of the socially awkward small talk, eye contact stuff out of the equation and really allows an employer to look at a person's talents and allows a candidate to be very clear about the kind of environment that they're going to succeed in. So Mentor.me, created by a couple of neurodivergent Georgia Tech engineering grads. Neurodiversity job boards. We have these on the CAN website. These are two of the big ones. There's a lot of disability job boards out there. These two focus on neurodiversity. The problem with these job boards is that they sometimes are kind of overwhelming. It's just, hundreds of jobs listed by companies that think this is a really good way to get some more employees. I won't say much more about that. Third-party experts. We're seeing, what I think of as the autism industrial complex, the emergence of this cottage industry of workplace training experts. And some of them support employer training and employer professional development. Some support the employee and some do both. A couple that I really like. Integrate Advisors they're terrific. And then Neurodiversity in the Workplace, Philadelphia based, but they're growing nationally. And both these organizations and a number of others do great work helping a business or an organization become more neurodiversity friendly, but also provide the kind of coaching and support sometimes needed by neurodivergent candidates. And then, there are these neurodiversity focused businesses, big businesses. CAI is a computer and tech firm that has a whole neurodiversity hiring effort. And so there are direct hire employers out there like Wells Fargo or JP Morgan Chase or Southwest Airlines, and they go out and they hire neurodivergent talent to come work for them. And then there are these contract agencies, and CAI and the Precisionists hire neurodivergent talent to then contract out to companies that see some value in neurodivergent talent. But these organizations provide the support themselves. And so the person is an employee of the Precisionists, but might be working at an accounting firm down the street. And I'll make a pitch too, if you have any opportunities at all to provide internships to neurodivergent candidates, especially, college seniors. This is so important. A lot of times they don't get jobs because they haven't had the typical neurotypical experiences of internships and summer jobs. And I'll just tell you a little bit about what CAN is doing. We try to bring employers and campus professionals together at our annual College Autism Summit to really talk to one another about what's working and what's not. We always call it pipeline alignment. The campuses are trying to get their students into the workforce. The employers are trying to find the talent. And if we can align those pipelines, great things happen. And at that summit, we co-host an annual employers symposium to talk about sort of best-in-class practices and strategies for hiring and retaining neurodivergent talent. If you go to the CAN website, you'll poke around a bit, you'll find Autism Career Empowerment, ACE. And this is an free online learning series for career services professionals who want to get up to speed on autism and neurodiversity. So going back to that equation of the challenge where career services folks don't know a lot about autism, we designed a 13-module series to help them better understand the autistic students that are coming through their doors. And we partner with Vanderbilt University's Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation and UConn's Center for Neurodiversity, Employment, and Innovation, always thinking about that moving through and moving on transition that our students need to make. You should come to the summit. It's in October. Watch our website for more details in the next couple of weeks. But last year we had about 300 people in Nashville, and it's just an amazing experience to really have these rich hallway conversations. And you can join CAN. We're happy to have you. But what we are about is changing the conversation. This is what we ask our members to join us in. Autism is not inherently a disability. The environment can make it one. Neurodiversity is as valuable to a community as any other type of diversity. It's not the sole responsibility of human resources, in your case, disability services on college campuses, to support autistic or neurodivergent employees, because their success is a win for everyone. So don't put them in a silo and expect that the person down the hall is the person who takes care of the autistic or neurodivergent employees and everybody else gets a pass. We've got to be a team and support them as a team. Okay, I'm just going to say thank you.